Hello? Oh, hello.
There you are. How are you
Sorry
doing
if there was
today?
some confusion about all that. I've been on here for a little bit.
Well, we have it figured out now. David, it is.
Noah. My email address is a little bit confusing, I suppose. But
Nice to meet you. I imagine that you do a lot of high school debating.
yeah, that's my primary field right now, till I found this.
That's great. Yeah. So I know you're anxious to get to it, get to this. So I'll go ahead and get started.
Great.
To win this debate, I believe you need to prove that by having a special relationship with Israel, the U.S. has a net gain versus the cost. I'm ready to explain why it's a net loss. Israel claims a special relationship is an asset because we share values and strategic interest, or that Israel has more common values than their neighbors, or they believe the arms sales are good for manufacturing. I have three conditions to this. A, the U.S. may have shared some common strategic interests during the Cold War, but it came at a steep price that fuels terrorism, including 9/11 and the aftermath. It turned states like Egypt and Syria against us. The U.S.'s only real strategic interest is oil that Israel doesn't have, but Iran does. B, morally, Israel is not a democracy because it seeks an ethnic majority as a Jewish state that cannot be met. An Arab may be elected within the proper borders, but is prohibited from speech against the ethnic majority as a call to racism. C, the manufacturing of these weapons is illegal under U.S. law. And that's actually just the beginning of my case, because I need to define what a special relationship is. Special relationship is over $150 billion overall since 1948 in foreign aid to Israel. That's right now. That's depending on who you ask. It's about $10 to $20 million a year, or about $3.1 billion annually. And some people even say that's about $20,000 over the lifetime of the average taxpayer. Israel also has a powerful foreign lobby, which is not registered under the FAR Act. Is that the only thing that makes this different from other foreign lobbies, other than the FAR Act, is the amount of this aid. Is the amount of aid, and that they're not allowed to register. But that's the only thing that's really different about it. It's not a conspiracy. It's a lobby for Israel. It's not a Jewish lobby. It doesn't control everything that happens in Washington. It's just to influence things their way. And they're not poor and defenseless, but the real loss for the United States, and I have 5 points on why it's a loss for the United States. So my first point on why it's a loss is the aid is used for colonization in violation of the Fourth Geneva Convention. Refugees denied a right to return in spite of being granted 52% of the land in 1948. Israel now controls 92%, which it annexes through force, and the remaining remainers are occupied. Number two, Israel develops nuclear weapons in secret. The Pentagon says Israel has at least 100 warheads, including thermonuclear weapons. They allow no inspections and don't deny this, which also makes giving them military aid. Constant pressure to enter regional conflicts. There's constant pressure for the U.S. to enter conflicts in Israel's interest. They claimed Iraq had secret nuclear weapons and still constantly insist that Iran does. In 1973, they almost cost the U.S. a nuclear war with Russia. The list goes on and continues. For politicians profess support as part of political campaigns. Number five, dual citizens hold major political offices as well as participate in think tanks and write policy papers. They've also attacked and spied on us. But what I want to emphasize is the impact this has on the United Nations. The Geneva Convention is non-binding, and the U.S. must enforce it. The open policy of vetoing any bill through the Negroponte and Haley doctrines damages the integrity and fuels contempt with Arab states and others. It has prevented non-proliferation in the region and elsewhere. The attack on Iraq outside of the UN Security Council, Israel claimed Iraq had nuclear weapons, extremely damaged the reputation of the United States just about anywhere else in the world. I can't forget that the sale of arms to an undeclared nuclear state with human rights violations is illegal under U.S. law. So if you're liberal, if you're conservative, are these really your values? Is it really in our interest, in our strategic interest in the Middle East, where our only real interest is to get oil, to have a third party involved? How much money, all this money that we're spending, couldn't we use it for a social program or just keep the taxes, however you look at that? And what are the values of the soldiers who die in these conflicts? So I know I can be a little long-winded, but that's my case in full, and I like to give it all in the beginning. So I'll go ahead. Go ahead.
Sure. So, well, I'm getting bad feedback from your end, I think. Like, I can hear everything I'm saying in echo.
You hear what I said, okay?
Yeah, I did. Okay, that's better. All right, so anyway. So I'm going to go ahead and present the points I had planned to present, and I'm going to sort of be addressing some of the things you said along with that. So I'm going to start out. I have 3 points. The first being that of the economic benefits involved in our special relationship to Israel. The first argument under that is that we really had the first free trade agreement with Israel of any nation that we had a free trade agreement with. That's according to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Like, our special relationship enabled us to have the first free trade agreement that we had with any nation in the world. Secondly, Israel is the top importer of U.S. goods, and half of all investment from the U.S. in the U.S. from the Middle East comes from Israel. So there's a ton of economic benefit, and that impacts out to my third point, which is that there are thousands of jobs supported in both countries thanks to these. Our arms deals with U.S. companies from Israel bring in thousands of jobs for Americans. So the impact of all this stuff is that our special relationship with Israel gives us a special economic relationship as well, which brings in lots of investment from the Middle East. It brings us and supports thousands of jobs in both countries. So Israel's special relationship with the U.S. provides us real economic benefits. My second point is that of the technological benefits. Now, Bill Gates said that the innovation going on in Israel is critical to the future of the technology business, and there are lots of reasons why. The first of many points that I could bring up, I've restricted myself to 3, is that of sustainable development. Now, Israel, being a country in the Middle East, largely in a desert, has created many solutions to the water crisis that they face, such as drip irrigation, which, as the world goes into an ever more serious water crisis, could be used by other countries, including America. They are also leaders in renewable energy, which is things that are going to be very beneficial as we move forward facing increasing environmental challenges like climate change. Secondly, there's that of military innovation. The U.S. government and the Israeli government routinely work together to develop sophisticated military technology. This is according to, let me find it again, Washington Institute Policy Analysis. They said that they've developed missile defense systems, and in 2006, they sold us $1.1 billion worth of technology. They've pioneered many cutting-edge technologies that are transforming the face of modern warfare, including cyber weapons, UAVs, sensor and electronic warfare systems, and advanced defenses for military vehicles. So there's a lot of benefit that we get from military innovation that happens in Israel, that we get coming to the U.S. because of our special relationship. Thirdly, under this section is that of information technology. Now, 250 multinational corporations have research labs in Israel. Two-thirds of those are U.S. companies. And Israeli firms often turn to U.S. firms to cooperate in looking for research. So firms are routinely turning to Israel, and there's that special relationship enables that to work. Thirdly, there's the strategic benefits, which I think is where we're going to see the most kind of argumentation in this round. Now, again, I'm going to have three major points along this end. The first being that it builds support for American interests. Now, this is actually Kissinger's argument for that special relationship with Israel. He makes the argument, back in the Cold War, of course, that if America was able to establish an ally and support our ally within the Middle East, then it would encourage and provide a basis for other nations within the Middle East to see how America treats our allies. And that would undermine the Soviet Union in the area. If America was able to consistently pick allies that were going to be victorious, then America would have a much better image in the region. And no, the Cold War isn't going on anymore, but we still have very real enemies in the region. And it's very important to have allies that can demonstrate the success. So when we're that's continually successful, that we're devoted to, that we are actually supporting, even though, of course, they aren't perfect, we're building support for American interests in the Middle East. My second point is that they're ideological allies. Now, you mentioned the fact that Israel wasn't really a full democracy. Now, I will have to agree to this. But if you look at John Rawls in The Law of Peoples, he points out that there are a couple different types of government. First of all, there is a liberal democracy. Secondly, there's a hierarchical society. Now, in the hierarchical society, rights of people are respected, even if not all people receive equal treatment. And he says that these kind of societies, these hierarchical societies, should be treated in international law in the way we treat liberal societies. So basically, it may not be an exact liberal democracy, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't treat them well. And they are, in many senses, they are very liberal, especially for their region. So they're not a paragon of equal treatment, but they're a stable liberal democracy, and that's something that's unique to the Middle East. So really supporting them helps to support our ideology, which does promote liberal democracy in a region that sorely lacks it. And thirdly, they are great for intelligence. Now, one example of this would be in 2010, Israel and America cooperated to develop the Stuxnet program, which helped to slow Iranian development of nuclear weapons. Now, regardless of what you think about Israeli nuclear weapons, for sure having Iran have them is a bad idea. And also, Israeli intelligence is some of the best in the world and is shared with America. So the reality is that we have enemies in the Middle East. And Israel provides a stable bulwark of American interests in the Middle East. We cooperate them and give them a lot of benefits. So I believe that the benefits clearly do outweigh the harms of the special relationship.
You make a lot of good moral cases, but the logic just isn't there. And it definitely falls short of my contentions. To kind of tie it all together, you say that there's economic benefits. The thing is, there really aren't, because of the amount of aid that Israel is getting. That's money that could be used elsewhere. It could be used for a social program, or people could just save it. It's a lot of money that we're talking about here. And the thing is, we can trade with plenty of people. Israel is very small. So I mean, I'm just not like, I don't really think that importing goods there. In fact, how much money does that bring into our economy in comparison? Would be it's kind of funny, because I did another debate where on overpopulation, and I use this as an example of why overpopulation is real, because it's actually basically it's an experiment. Because you say, like, they figured out how to solve this water crisis. Of course, the Palestinians don't have equal access to water, but the thing is, they actually haven't. I mean, they have made like these great strides, like they really have. The thing is, they still can't solve it. They have to actually, I think they can only, if I remember this right, it's about only 60% they can only provide for 60% of their need for food and water internally, so the rest has to be imported. So yeah, they're making a lot of great innovations there, but no, they're actually proving that you can't move into all these people into a desert that's overpopulated, and it's really a large part of the problem, because of course one of the things that I illustrated is that it has to have an ethnic majority, and that's really the problem, is that they can't achieve that, and the numbers aren't there to say that they can achieve it in the near future, and that's really the driving point that keeps the conflict going more than anything. Of course, there's refugees, and I mean there's a lot. It's a very vast issue. As far as this military technology goes, you say missile defense. We've only had to buy like 3 missile defense shields because of these rockets. And I don't think anyone should be firing rockets, but we have to look at the death tolls, and they're literally thousands of people, which includes women and children, as opposed to a few dozen people. And then you have to even include on the Israeli side the soldiers that died invading. So I mean, I think you're talking about BDS more than like why. I think you're like with this thing with the economy, because it's not really, because we should trade. I mean, we should have a normal relationship, not would mean trading assertively. So that would mean by breaking the rules, by having nuclear weapons. You're not supposed to have nuclear weapons. That to set the good example, because we have a Security Council vote at the UN that we shouldn't be doing that trade. So I mean, I think that they really. I mean, there isn't much of an economic case, because I don't know how much money. You're not giving me a number that's brought in that can justify the average taxpayer spending $20,000 into Israel, are 10 to $20 million a year, $3 billion annually, which is more than any other country. And I mean, of course, we have to go back to the Cold War, and then I mean, if you go back to look as far as, so I'm moving on to your strategic benefits, and you talk about the Cold War, and of course you're not talking about the war on terror and 9/11 and the fact that Bin Laden's on video in '96. Like, well, why do you hate the United States so much? Oh, well, the Arab-Israeli conflict. So he said this in '96. It was on broadcast TV. It was during an interview. So we're talking about the Cold War, and the thing is, they turned states like Syria against us, and Israel's been at war with Syria for a long time. So now there's a conflict in Syria, and it's really no different. This has been going on since 1948. And the situation in Lebanon, Egypt decided to side with us instead of the Soviets. But the thing is that there was a real cost to this, because in 1973 it almost started a nuclear war during the Yom Kippur War. Actually, the U.S. and it's no secret that they had threatened to use their nuclear weapons, and the U.S. had to intervene to stop that, or there would have been a nuclear war. So I don't think coming up with some cool gadgets makes that okay. As far as you say that they respect the right, they don't. Look, this is split up into different areas, and one area, the people occupation, they're supposedly, you're saying they're equally represented. They don't even have the same right to water. And they supposedly, and the UN didn't even recognize Palestine until 2012, and Hillary Clinton said that was an abuse of the UN process. So I really doubt that they're equally represented. Of course, with the Haley Doctrine and Negroponte Doctrine that I mentioned, we'll always vote against anything that would stop this. That's the policy. So I don't think that they're represented at all there. And as far as sharing intelligence, in the 1980s, there was this guy just got out of prison. Actually, his name is Jonathan Pollard, and he was an Israeli Mossad agent who got a job. I can't remember the government agency offhand, but he stole all this information that was from the U.S. government, went home, Xeroxed it, and brought it back the next day, and he gave it all to the Soviets. He got caught red-handed doing it. You just look it up if you don't believe me. His name's Jonathan Pollard. He just got out of prison about a year ago. And Edward Snowden claims that all, like, that whole Edward Snowden thing that the NSA is watching us. He claims that all of that information is cycled through Israel, and the company that does that is Israeli. And they even mention the problems with this with Israel in the movie before he has this transformation and he's working there. It's even in that movie. So I mean, I'm not hearing. I just don't see a benefit here. Can you tell me when you say there's an economic benefit? Can you give me a number to compare to, and can you give me an example today of how this is strategically in our interest?
Okay, I will. I'm finding the U.S. exports to Israel by year right now, but I do know that 25% of our goods that we send into the Middle East go into Israel. Like 25% of our imports to the Middle East go right to Israel. That's the biggest number in the region. So Israel's taking the bulk of U.S. trade in the entire region of the Middle East. And as I already mentioned earlier, they're investing in half of our investment that comes from the Middle East comes from Israel. Yes. So then this says the U.S. trade representative says that Israel's currently our 25 largest goods trading partner with $36 billion in total trade during 2013.
How much of the U.S.
So
economy?
there's your number.
How much of the U.S. economy is that?
Well, as I said, it's the 25th largest goods trading partner. That's not the U.S. economy is measured in trillions. So yeah, that's not like an extraordinarily significant percentage of the U.S. economy. What was that?
What are we trading with them?
Goods and services.
Like weapons to kill Palestinians.
It's not just that. It's a well. Okay, here's the breakdown. It looks like the two top export categories in 2013 were precious stones, electrical machinery, aircraft, and optic and medical instruments. There's a lot of agricultural trade.
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, agricultural. But other than agricultural stuff, what do you think those other things are used for?
Okay. Wait a minute. Yeah, so that's what it was. It's precious stones, electrical machinery, aircraft, optic and medical equipment, instruments.
I mean, what do they need that stuff for?
Things like machinery and optic and medical equipment, I'd imagine they'd be used for a lot of things, like cars or hospitals. Aircraft is a pretty specific thing.
Maybe bombing people and tearing their house down and building a new one there.
Well, who do you think they're bombing?
Well, they're bombing Gaza. They're bombing Syria right now.
Well, yeah, that's because there's a civil war going on right now.
Why is there a civil war in Syria?
Because they're rebels against Assad.
Who backs the rebels?
The U.S.
U.S.
Israel.
And who else?
Yeah, but honestly, a lot of that actually started not because of the U.S. backing Israel. That's like when you have an autocratic dictator in the Middle East. There often end up with people who are discontent with that kind of situation. Like you have Iran and Russia backing Assad.
Sorry?
Well, you have Iran and Russia backing Assad.
Yeah, the Cold War just goes back to the Cold War. And I mean, so yeah, they've actually been at war since 1948. If you just go back about 10 years ago, actually, they were being accused of supporting the insurgency, which would be rebels in Syria now are the radicals. About 10 years ago, they were actually accused of supporting that, and they claim they didn't. The thing is that they've actually been fighting over the Golan Heights. Are you familiar with the Golan Heights?
Yes.
Okay, well, they've been fighting over the Golan Heights. They took it over in 1967. They kicked 80,000 Arabs out of there, and then they colonized it. They've actually gone ahead and annexed it, which they haven't done to the West Bank. But it's not. But this is in the recent history. They actually had a political leader executed, Yitzhak Rabin. This is in the 90s. He's running against Netanyahu. PBS talks about how some people believe that this is on PBS that Netanyahu had some assassination, but Anyway, my point is that this guy, Yitzhak Rabin, one of the reasons that he's believed to have been executed is that he wanted to give back the Golan Heights and he wanted to make peace with Syria. So the thing is that they've been trying to broker this deal for a long time over the Golan Heights, and there's actually 22 Arab states. It's led by Saudi Arabia, where they'll make peace, and Syria was on board with this. Like, look, just give us back the Golan Heights, and we're cool. And Syria was on board with that, and then also Saudi Arabia leads a charter of 22 Arab states that claim that they would be more than happy to recognize Israel and trade with them if they would just stop doing what they're doing to the Palestinians and leave Jerusalem, because that's a big part of this too. Because you have refugees, and the refugee problem isn't one that's ever accounted for.
Yeah, I'm not here to say that Israel is some kind of fantastic model of egalitarian democracy, but
So I'm saying,
I think you should be fair. There is a part of the reason that Israel first took over the Golan Heights in 1967 was because the Golan Heights were being used as a platform for attacking Israel. Like, they were setting up artillery on the Golan Heights and bombarding Galilee. So Israel was like, "There's
that's
a
illegal.
big threat to our."
It's illegal.
What was that?
It's because they annexed it, and because they're colonizing there, because they're building there. That's illegal under the Fourth Geneva Convention. I can look up the clause.
The colonization, and like the settlements in the West Bank, that's a problem, and it's impeding peace in the region.
It's a problem, but it's not the biggest problem. The colonization is a problem, but it goes beyond the West Bank. Because, like I said, the center of this is Jerusalem. You're going back before even Saudi Arabia and these things that Syria tried to do with the Clintons, and Bill Clinton went there during his presidency. I mean, they were trying to. It was actually considered one of the most peaceful places to live in the world. Getting back to my point, like they were trying to negotiate that they would be our partner, that Syria would be our partner, and it wasn't. And then, of course, when 2011 rolled around, the first thing that when this thing kicked off was Israel bombed Syria and claimed that they had all these weapons or something. And all of a sudden, there's this insurgency, and it turns out, as we find out more and more in the media, that the U.S. has been funding it, and of course they've continued these airstrikes the entire time. And it really goes back to my point. This goes back to my point about having foreign agents in the government. Richard Pearl, I think he was Cheney's top aide. He actually wrote a policy document in the 90s with Netanyahu that's called the Clean Break Strategy. And the whole idea of this policy document that he wrote with Netanyahu, because he's a dual citizen, is that the U.S. would go to war with any Middle Eastern state that doesn't benefit Israel. Because you're not telling me like how this supports our strategic interests today. Because in the Cold War it kind of did, but not really. And I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't know how much of this our economy it would impact, especially if it's weapons, because we pay for that. So it's coming out of our pocket to begin with. Would be the main reason for your economic argument.
Okay, so let me go back to the weapons. Now, to start out with, you talked some about the whole military technology, and you said that, well, we're not getting much from the military technology. So the article I was
today because of technology that they developed. I don't believe that.
The article I was quoting is from the Washington Institute, and they said actually that the U.S. Israel work together to develop sophisticated military technology, such as missile defense systems, which, they're building for the U.S. and other U.S. allies.
Okay, well, we pay for them.
Also, we cooperate with them to develop this technology.
Okay, but these missile defense shields, they don't work. We just bought a new one in 2014 for another $100 million. Everyone voted for it. Bernie Sanders voted for it. Okay, so
I'm not too familiar with that.
Who's your reference? Who do you think? Like, it's the middle. What is it again?
It's the Washington Institute.
Okay, the Washington Institute. Who are they?
Who are they?
Yeah.
You mean like the authors of this report?
Yeah, like
or who's?
who writes that? Like is that America, or do Americans write that? Is that, well, maybe Americans write it, but like
Yes, they're Americans, I believe.
huh?
The authors are Michael Eisenstadt and David Pollock.
Okay, well, I think that they're actually I don't want to. I think that's actually not like, that's kind of like a buy, like in the gun control debate, Ben was saying how Nelson yesterday. I don't know if you saw that debate, but how his reference is like American gun owners or something. Like you're they're kind of like the lobby organization. I think that's kind of that's the lobby
Okay.
organization that you're.
Okay, so are you asserting that the Washington Institute is a lobby organization for Israel?
No, more for like defense contractors, but that's part of it. They're not. It's not like this.
Okay,
They,
do
I
you
mean,
have any
like
proof?
this, like how the gun lobby, like they might have published something and
Okay,
saying.
do you have proof of that?
I'll look it up.
Okay, please do.
It's the law. That's why, I mean, because
Okay,
I
so
mean,
anyway, I'm gonna go back to my argument, which is that, well, we are cooperating with them and they're helping us develop important military technology. And in addition to that, where was I?
but you're not telling me you
Okay,
don't support it.
I'm getting to the rest of the strategic benefits in a minute. So then, yeah, they are the U.S. As I pointed out, the Israeli defense industry provides a lot of important and new military technology. So that's something that's very important, and because of our special relationship, we have special access to that kind of thing. So then, regarding the strategic benefits, I pointed out at first that we have a benefit in the fact that helping and supporting Israel provides more capital for U.S. interests abroad. And like the idea was not just during the Cold War, but even now when we're facing enemies such as Iran or Russia, the fact that America is such a steady and important ally to Israel does provide evidence to other nations in the region that America is the one you want to go to. Now, this is actually what this is, let me find the exact reference here, but what it said was that Saudi Arabia has actually gone and is paying, is actually looking to help work with Israel. They've reached out to Israel to work together. And part of that is because of the fact that relationship with Israel. So they're actually working together, partly because of that. And we talked a little bit about the ideological strategic interest we have in supporting democracy in the Middle East. And I'm not going to deny that Israel does treat the Palestinians poorly, and they do a lot of stuff that I don't support at all. But they are that doesn't make them any less a liberal democracy. And they are a liberal democracy in a region that's nearly bereft of liberal democracies. And so it provides us an ideological interest in promoting liberal democracy in the region by supporting Israel here. And the third point, we talked about intelligence. Now, I presented the numbers and the examples about how Israel is one of the best intelligence agencies in the world. Secondly, they've actually worked with the U.S. in the past to help stop Iran from getting nuclear weapons. And finally, I pointed out that their intelligence is often shared with America. Like, we work together on counterterrorism operations and things. So we have a definite strategic interest because of their intelligence that they are continually helping us with. So that's where you see the strategic interest. You see the intelligence, the ideological interests, as well as just the interest of promoting American capital abroad as an ally.
Okay, well, you're still not telling me whether there's a war on terror. You're just saying they're helping us in the war on terror. And as I've said, they were in the Bush administration. They wrote the paper to go into places like Iraq and Syria because they weren't acting in Israel's interest. And because our interest is oil, that's why we're allies with Saudi Arabia. And the Saudis, like I said, they have agreed since I think 2001 and through this Arab initiative to make peace, to stop doing what you're doing to the Palestinians. But I think their interest is oil, and their big oil competitor happens to be Iran. So they have a reason. Yes, they have a reason to not like Iran, but it's not their love for Israel, especially because of the holy sites, because of Jerusalem. I think that because they are friends behind closed doors, that's why the Temple Mount it still belongs to the Muslims, is because of Saudi Arabia. So behind closed doors, they actually have a good relationship with Saudi Arabia, but not so much outside of those doors. I'm not really trying to argue that. The thing is, I don't think. No, I mean, I'm not saying these states are all great, but I'm not. I don't think that we have any responsibility whatsoever to tell somebody they have to be a democracy with a big stick. Okay, they don't need to adopt my values.
I'm not saying that they have to. I'm not saying that that's the U.S.'s inevitable interest in any region of the world, just promoting democracy by force. I'm just saying it looks good when we support our friends who are democracies and cooperate with them.
They're not a democracy, though. They're not a democracy because they're like I said, they're actively trying to achieve an ethnic majority, and that's really why this thing's going on. And I talked to Ben about this in a debate. We debated on this, that I believe that it is one state now because they occupy 92% of the land, and that the two-state narrative is a false narrative, because for that reason it's just not going to happen. The time's up.
Okay, so I have a question then. So you believe that Israel's trying to occupy the West Bank and the Gaza Strip?
They're not trying to. They have since 1967, and it's against the Geneva Convention.
Okay, but do you think that they want to become like one state within that area?
They want to have one state, and the reason that they haven't done that yet is because they want to have a Jewish majority. And actually, I want to make sure that we don't forget. I looked up who the Washington Institute is, and it's a think tank. Okay, so this is according to Wikipedia. I just looked it up real quick. It's the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, right? Okay. The Washington Institute for Near East Policy is an American think tank based in Washington, D.C., focused on the foreign policy of the United States as it pertains to countries of Southwest Asia. So it's a think tank. Established in 1985, the Institute's mission says that it seeks to advance a balanced and realistic understanding of American interests in the Middle East and to promote the policies that secure them. The stance is often described as pro-Israel. So it's a pro-Israel think tank from Washington, D.C.
Okay. Well, where'd you get your information?
Wikipedia. Go ahead.
I'm not talking about the Washington Institute. I'm talking about like your information in general.
My information in general, for this debate, it's mostly based on these conferences that I go to Washington, D.C., and they get these great authors. Like I met Jonathan Mearsheimer from Chicago. He wrote a really famous and infamous book, The Israel Lobby and U.S. Foreign Policy. But I've been following this for about 5 years, and I've been studying it. This debate before, but it wasn't really a debate. I talked to somebody who lives in Israel about it. We just kind of had fun and talked about it, which is great. And we're actually Facebook friends now. And I'm sure she's probably watching now if she doesn't sleep or with her children. So, yeah, there's a lot of sources. I'm prepared to cite that. I don't want anyone to think when I post that it's to win the debate. But yeah, I can cite all this stuff. Haaretz, that's a left-wing Israeli newspaper. I'm using Al Jazeera, but I don't like Al Jazeera. I haven't really looked at my notes too much, so let me just what they can.
Well, anyway, so I have a couple things though. First of all, you can't maintain an ethnic majority while also wanting to annex the West Bank and not the Golan Heights, but the Gaza Strip, because there are just more Arabs in all that area combined with Israel as it is right now, as well as the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, than there are Israelis. Like if they were to annex then in Israel proper, there would be far more Arabs than there would be Israelis.
Okay, well, it's not a democracy.
And the Arabs have a much better. But the Arabs have a much greater birth rate than the Israelis do.
No, they don't. So if they leave there, they
can't.
I'm Jewish, so I mean, I probably have a better chance, or at least my grandmother was. So I have a better chance of move in there than those Arabs do. I mean, like I said, the refugee problem, you ask the Palestinian, you said, why can't you solve this? Like, what's the biggest problem? It's the refugee problem. It's people that don't even live in the West Bank or Gaza. They live in Jordan. I've met them here in the United States. They live everywhere, but yeah, a lot of them live in Jordan, and it's Syria. A lot of them live in Lebanon. So no.
Okay. Well, anyway, I think we're getting a little off track, but I would
Well, we're
like
not
to.
hearing the benefit.
I
I mean,
think
it's easy for me to say like why it's a bad idea, like why we're not getting a benefit here, but I'm not hearing how there's a benefit. Because I mean,
okay.
you
So
have
I
these
pointed.
weapons,
So I already
we're paying
pointed
for all this
out
stuff. This
we have a special economic relationship that enables us to have better trade than we otherwise would have, and
it
that's
comes from
largely
taxes.
because of our support. What was that?
It comes from taxes, though. It comes out of our own pockets.
If you're talking about like trade relationships, then no.
Well, the trade relationship, like I said, is weapons. You're talking about military.
It's not entirely weapons.
Military
It's like
relationships.
it's not even mostly weapons
It is mostly
that we're trading back and forth.
weapons. All the money that we give them is for
Not according to the U.S. Trade Representative. The U.S. Trade Representative says that it's that $5.8 billion of it are precious stones. Electrical machinery and machinery, that's about $2.6 billion of it. Aircraft is $8.23 million of it, and optic and medical instruments are $6.66 million of it.
Well, those are all things that you would.
The majority of that is by no means anything necessarily military related.
Okay, well, if they buy a Caterpillar, if they buy a bulldozer from Caterpillar, they use it to colonize. If they buy
That's not necessarily
IBM,
true.
they use it for military. So they're using it. Yes, it's used to colonize because they are.
I think you're making unwarranted assumptions in this case.
They left. They did the same thing on Golan Heights. What are you saying?
You're making unwarranted assumptions.
What's unwarranted about it?
You can't just say that because they bought this technology that could be used for colonization or military purposes, that it is being used for colonization or military purposes.
But they're doing that. They don't do that? Because in your opinion, you don't think it's colonization.
There are plenty of people in Israel
Are they in the West Bank or are they bombing Gaza?
They are in the West Bank. I'm not sure about their bombing Gaza, but that does not mean that every bulldozer we send to Israel is going to be used for building settlements in the West Bank. There are plenty of normal construction activities in Israel that have nothing to do with settlements in the West Bank.
Oh, maybe, but it's overpopulated, and they haven't answered that either. I don't really, the thing is, like, here's the thing. Like I said, like I think we should have a normal relationship. So I'm saying I'm not, like I was saying earlier, like I think you're talking more about BDS than if it's a benefit for the U.S. because I think we should have a normal relationship. So I'm not saying there can't be any benefit. Like just drop them. I'm saying we should just have a normal relationship, and there should be boundaries. Because one example would be Eisenhower. He cut their aid. He told them they had to clean up their act, and they did it. So we should have it's just an assertive relationship. It's not. We don't need to have a special relationship. I mean, there's 700 foreign lobbies. They're all registered except for one, and I don't think that we grant them this much money. And of course, they have. I'm sure that they're trying to influence something, but we don't have them in our government. They're not writing policy papers with the president of another government that has us at war in Iraq and says that he stabilized the region, including Syria. They wrote that in the 90s. They wrote another paper before that, but I don't know.
Cool. Anyway, I think when we look at the whole issue in this region, the war on Israel, I don't believe, is responsible for the war on terror. Like, we've done plenty to get ourselves at war on terror to earn the enmity of nations like Iran that has nothing to do with supporting Israel.
The big thing with Iran from the beginning, though, even if you go back to the 70s when the Shah was overthrown and the radicalization, is that they were upset about Jerusalem. And even the Saudis will admit this. They'll say, I think to make peace with Iran that you have to solve this problem because that's been the underlying cause. And Iran has actually been the Saudis, they're willing to scratch each other's backs behind closed doors, but the Iranians have never done that. They've been opposed to peace talks. But the thing is, they have a lot of oil, and Israel doesn't.
Okay, so we're running out of time. So, so basically, I just say we have a special economic relationship that wouldn't exist without it, special technological benefits that wouldn't exist without it, and we gain a lot strategically from being